All right. Thanks so much for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Ryan Fagan, and I'm a planning project manager with the Tucson Department of Transportation and Mobility. And we're here to talk about a couple of projects that are coming up on 5th and 6th Street and some alternatives that we're looking at for the design. This is intended to be a business meeting. It's okay if you're not affiliated with a business. Yeah, feel free to join and ask questions. And we will be scheduling more meetings coming up that will have a broader outreach. So stay tuned for that. So there's actually two projects that are happening on 5th and 6th Street as part of Proposition 407. Tucson delivers strong connections, which was approved by Tucson voters in 2018. We're going to be designing and building improvements on 5th Street and 6th Street between Campbell and Alvernon. That'll include improvements like complete sidewalks, curb ramps, street lighting, enhanced pedestrian crossings, and new landscaping. And we'll be coming back in a few months with more information on that project so we can listen to your ideas and incorporate them into the design of that project. For now, we're more focused on the opportunity that's provided by the repaving work that we're doing on 5th Street as part of Proposition 101, Tucson Delivers Better Streets. And that was approved by voters in 2017. And as part of that, the roadway from Country Club to Wilmot is planned to have the pavement completely reconstructed and new ADA compliant curb ramps installed where they aren't currently compliant. And you can see that those projects overlap between Country Club and Alvernon. And we want to make sure we're designing all of this as one project and not coming back and making changes after one of the projects is complete. So we're looking at the whole 5 miles from Campbell to Wilmot as one project and make sure that we're thinking about the whole corridor together. So since we're repaving the road from Country Club to Wilmot, we'll have a blank slate, so to speak, as far as the asphalt goes. And that'll provide an opportunity to think about the design of the road and potentially to incorporate community needs and priorities that might be different than they were in the past. And while we're not repaving from Campbell to Country Club at this time, we do plan to provide a consistent design across the whole corridor for the whole 5 miles from Campbell to Wilmot. And just FYI, west of Campbell is not part of a funded project, so we're not considering any changes on 6th Street in that area at this time. So we're considering 2 basic design options for the street. Option A is shown here, and that would keep pretty much the same configuration that we have today, which is 4 lanes, 2 vehicle lanes in each direction, no center turn lane except at major intersections, and no bike lanes. And the roadway width and context does vary along the route, particularly at major intersections. So it's not exactly the same, all the way from Campbell to Wilmot. But by and large, the intention is for the road to have one kind of basic configuration. So this is option A. Now option B, shown here, that would be 3 lanes. And that would reconfigure the roadway striping primarily to improve safety. And this involves going from 2 through lanes in each direction to 1 through lane in each direction. And we expect that'll reduce the roadway capacity somewhat, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. The change striping provides room to add a continuous center turn lane and bike lanes. And along most of the corridor, there would be room for buffered bike lanes, which provide that extra space between the vehicle lanes and the bike lane. So why would we want to change the striping? The biggest reason really is safety. There have been a lot of studies of streets that have been restriped from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, and they found a reduction in crashes from 19% up to 47%. Here in Tucson, 36th Street was restriped, similar to what we're proposing here, and crashes fell by about 70%. And this tends to be due to the reduction of a few types of crashes. Rear-end crashes are one, and that can be due to cars waiting to turn left in the through lane. We also expect to see a reduction in excessive speeding because cars can't weave in and out of traffic the way they can now. And we also expect a reduction in sideswipe crashes. Now for people walking, this design greatly reduces what's called the multiple threat crash type. And that occurs when you have a person who's waiting across the street on foot. That could be at a marked or unmarked crosswalk. It could be at a push button crossing like a hawk light. And what happens is that one car stops to let that person go. And that actually blocks the view between the pedestrian and the car coming in the far lane. And then both of them end up thinking that their path is clear. So that's a situation we want to avoid. And a conversion to 3 lanes would largely eliminate this issue. So I went out and took photos of 5th and 6th Street a while back for the project website, and I wasn't really even looking for this. I was more interested in just sort of getting views of the road. But when I was looking at the photos after I got back, I noticed a bunch of examples of this situation where their cars waiting to make a left turn and cars kind of stacking up behind them. And if you drive on 5th and 6th regularly, this is probably very familiar to you. You've probably seen this and experienced this, and that's whether you're the one making the turn or whether you're just trying to go straight along the street. It's not the most comfortable feeling, whichever part of that equation you're in, because you never know when a car ahead of you is going to come to a stop to wait for an opening to turn. And it is more than a minor annoyance for a couple of reasons. It reduces the capacity of the road at times when it's most needed. At rush hour, at peak times, you have more people waiting to make that turn, for example, to turn into their neighborhood to get home. And you have cars coming in the opposite direction that make that wait longer. So it creates unpredictability, which we try to minimize. And in addition to that issue, on a 4-lane road, you sometimes end up with a situation where you have two drivers facing each other and both trying to make a turn at the same spot. And they can end up blocking each other's view and make it hard to know when you can turn. I live near Country Club Road, which is very similar in configuration to 5th and 6th. And I've encountered this myself when I'm trying to turn onto my street. It's not an ideal situation. And when there's a center turn lane, that moves the left turning drivers into a position where they have good visibility and can see oncoming traffic. 3-lane roads also just tend to have smoother traffic flow with less excessive speeding and fewer vehicles stopped waiting to turn. And it makes for a more predictable drive. And one improvement you might not expect is improved emergency response. It turns out that in practice, a center lane is easier to navigate for first responders, more so than weaving around cars trying to get out of the way from 2 lanes in both directions. And this is one of the reasons that the Federal Highway Administration is supportive of this type of change. And restriping the roadway also improves walking and biking conditions. It provides room for bike lanes, which we don't currently have on 5th and 6th Street. And along most of the corridor, there's enough room to provide a buffered lane, as shown here. It also improves pedestrian crossings the way that I mentioned earlier by providing a solution to that multiple thread issue. And it also allows space for refuge islands. There's an example here. This is actually on 36th Street, which I mentioned earlier, and this was installed after that road was converted from 4 to 3 lanes. And what this does is it allows the pedestrians to cross the street in 2 stages rather than waiting for both directions of travel to be clear. It also makes for a more comfortable experience because it takes bikes out of vehicle lanes and gives them a bike lane with a buffer from car traffic. And it moves traffic further away from the sidewalk and adjacent properties.
Good too.
So I wish I could tell you that there are no downsides to restriping the roadway. You probably are already kind of thinking about how much longer it's going to take to drive across town on 5th and 6th. And at rush hour, it is expected to increase travel times somewhat. We've had analysis done by an engineering consultant we work with, and based on some traffic modeling that was done along 5th and 6th, we would expect travel time could increase by about 6% in the morning peak hour and 8% in the evening peak hour. We also expect that there may be an increase in bus travel times as well. Currently, when buses stop along 5th and 6th Street, they're stopping in the vehicle lane. And so as soon as they're finished picking up or dropping off passengers, they can go immediately. Now, with a 3-lane configuration, they would pull, pretty much out of the vehicle lane. Cars would be going by, and when they're finished with picking up or dropping off passengers, they would have to wait for a gap in traffic in order to go. So that does have an impact on bus travel times. We haven't quantified that yet, but we would expect that would be a situation that we'd encounter. And then as far as the vehicle travel times, I do want to mention that this is based on a little bit older traffic count data. And a long-term trend that we're seeing on 5th and 6th is that traffic volumes have been decreasing for about the last 20 years. About 20 years ago, the average was about 20,000 vehicles per day. You can see that it varies along the corridor. We do, or rather, FEMA Association of Governments, they do count for us.
Yeah. Dovidlevy. Yeah, ZEV.
If you wouldn't mind muting, if you're not asking a question, I appreciate that. So there are traffic counts done every few years and about every mile. So, but the average about 20 years ago was about 20,000 vehicles per day along the corridor. Now it's more like 15,000 vehicles per day. And this puts the road well within the guidelines set by the Federal Highway Administration for a reconfiguration from 4 to 3 lanes. And while travel times may increase somewhat, we expect the travel operations on 5th and 6th would function well and would have a good predictability. So just to give you an idea of the timeline, where we're at now with this process and what's coming up, we've been presenting directly to neighborhood associations along the corridor. Right now, we're doing the business outreach, and we're looking for input from people in those neighborhoods and businesses along 5th and 6th Street, because we do want to, we do want to hear. We're really trying to kind of take the temperature of the community and get an idea of, which option has more support. So please feel free to share the project website and the survey with others in the neighborhood, other businesses that you may have relationships with along 5th and 6th. And coming up soon, in the next few months, we'll be kind of broadening that public outreach. We'll be having broader public meetings intended for anyone in the community. And then a little bit after that, most likely we will be doing outreach on the pedestrian safety and walkability improvements that I mentioned from Campbell to Alvernon. And then following that, we'll go through a design process, and we would expect mid-2023 is what we're currently thinking as far as the start of construction. And the construction process we would expect would take at least 4 months, and that would include 2 to 3 months for the removal of the asphalt and the reconstruction of the pavements from from Country Club to Wilmot, as well as an extra few months that would also include the sidewalk and other improvements between Campbell and Alvernon. So we really do want to know what you think. We haven't started design yet. We are trying to kind of take the pulse of the community. So we have a survey on the project website, so you can give us your feedback. There's a lot of information about the project, about these kinds of 4 to 3 lane conversions that have been done across the country, really, and case studies, so you can learn about sort of how it went in other places. So we really encourage you to check that information out and to take the survey. So now I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Hi, Ryan, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. My name is Israel Becker. Hi, I'm first, thanks so much for inviting us. I really appreciate the opportunity for input. Our synagogue is located on 5th Street, just east of Rosemont. Mm-hmm. And there are times during the day where most of the day, I guess the traffic is moderate, but there are times, especially in the afternoon, where traffic seems to be heavy. It seems to me, from being in Tucson for close to 43 years, that there is an ever-increasing issue of traffic, both north-south and east-west, within our city. So right now, Broadway is crowded, Speedway is crowded, Grant is crowded, and 5th Street is somewhat crowded, not as much as those others. But my concern is that one concern is that if we take 5th Street, which is already an option, and take away 1 lane on each side, it's going to create a traffic problem, a traffic issue. It might even increase more traffic on Broadway or Speedway. And so I'm trying to, I appreciate your invitation, and I certainly need to look, because I don't know anything about I can't perceive the advantage of a 3 lane. in other words, a 2-lane with one direction each way with a turning lane. I can't perceive the advantage of that for traffic flow. So I will certainly take your invitation to look and study that. But if you can maybe somehow give me some insight as to why this would not increase traffic and not increase backlog going east-west in Tucson.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that. It's not especially intuitive. And as I mentioned, at peak times there may be an increase in travel times. There may be a little bit more delay. So I'll try to address. And if I miss any of your questions, please let me know. But as far as potential diversion of traffic off of 5th and 6th onto adjacent roads like Speedway and Broadway, we would expect that there may be a small amount of that. The experience of other road diets is sometimes there's none, even on roads that have as much traffic as 5th and 6th do now. Sometimes it's some relatively small percentage. In some cases, it's a little bit more, but that's often when there's a lot more traffic than what we currently see on 5th and 6th Street. And I do want to mention, we do have other streets in Tucson that are 3 lanes that have a similar amount of traffic to 5th and 6th. Prince Road east of Campbell is one of them. Some sections of Glen Street. So we do have roads that already function well, that have this kind of configuration. And there's a few reasons for that. I mentioned the issue, you wouldn't have cars backing up while someone's waiting to make a left turn. And when you have a lot of that, the term for that is kind of it's a de facto 3-lane road. Is essentially if there's enough of that kind of movement happening, enough people who are stopped waiting to turn, that really does limit the capacity of the road. You also, I mentioned it as sort of a downside for transit users as far as bus travel times, but buses being able to pull out of the vehicle lanes, that helps with traffic flow as well. At major intersections where we don't currently have right turn lanes, we may have room to actually add right turn lanes, and so that would help address sort of the throughput issue at those major intersections. And those intersections are kind of where the bottleneck is. So if we can provide that right turn lane that we don't currently have, if we can if there are benefits as far as buses not causing cars to back up and left turners not creating that issue as well, all of that adds up essentially to a lot less of a difference than it might seem at first glance. Does that answer your question?
It's a starter.
Okay.
It's a starter. So okay. So what was the motivation? 5th Street is it a safety motivation?
That's the primary one, yeah, and that's that's due to the fact that there's been a lot of studies of these kinds of conversions. There's been a lot of streets around the country that have had this done. In Tucson, this has been done. I mentioned on 36th Street, but it's also been done on West Speedway. It's been done on North Tucson Boulevard. That was done almost 30 years ago, actually, and it's really. How do I put this? Yeah, I mean, it's really due to the expected reduction in crashes that we would expect. From a traffic engineering perspective, this is what's known as a crash modification factor. Is that when we have solid data on any kind of treatment or modification to a road, we can expect that when we implement that change, we would see those kinds of results, and so that's really the driving motivator.
Is there a motivation to increase transit options for bicyclists? Is that part of the motivation?
It's more of sort of like a secondary benefit. I would not say that that's the primary reason behind it. It's certainly I've given a lot of these give a lot of these presentations and talked to a lot of people. There are quite a few people who are looking forward to it. If this change is made to having those bike lanes on 5th Street. There is a bike route on 3rd Street that's a little bit north of there.
Of course.
But I've also heard from that doesn't get you to the businesses and other destinations along 5th and 6th Street. I've also heard from people. I actually hadn't even really thought of this, but who live south of 5th Street, who don't really have a good bikeway to use. So, it's a secondary benefit, but it's definitely not the driving factor.
Okay. Okay. When will the decision be made? The final decision as to what to plant. In other words, it's either the two options are to keep it the way it is and just repave, or to create this 3-lane option. All right. So when will that be? When will that decision be? The final decision be made?
That is a great question, and I don't have an answer for it. So we're kind of taking this. We're taking this sort of.
No, I just want to know how much time I have to vacillate with what my opinion is.
I'd say you have at least a few months. So as I mentioned, we're really early on in this process. We haven't even done sort of the broader outreach that we normally do, where we send out tens of thousands. We'll send out tens of thousands of mailers. We'll promote it in a lot of different ways, so that anybody who has any interest in this.
So this is the beginning phase of the publicity.
That's correct. Yeah. So I mentioned we're kind of taking this one step at a time, because if it turns out that the early the early response is very negative to a change, that may seal it. If it's more mixed, or if it's positive, I think we'll continue it. And
have there been, aside from, has this been a recorded problem? The problem of traffic stopping on 5th Street. Has this been a noticed problem? Have there been complaints about it submitted? And B, sorry, Ryan, there's no throw me. B, have there been any accidents recorded because of that? Which I could certainly see happening, but has it happened on 6th Street, 5th Street, 5th, 6th, because of somebody trying to make a left turn and then stopping traffic, and then traffic coming the other direction? Any history here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I'm not aware of complaints, I guess, that have been submitted, officially to the department about that. But when you have a road that's been the same for a long time, I think people tend to adapt to that. But it's something that's definitely come up in the meetings that I've presented at, people who don't like that situation. And as far as crashes, it can be hard to tease out the exact reasons for crashes, but there are crashes. We typically work with a 5-year time range when we're looking at crash history. There have been crashes of various types, including rear ends. There have been fatal and serious injury collisions as well. So it can be hard to without investing a lot of time into looking at the details on a specific roadway, but the experience of similar roadways and more detailed study that's been done there really helps to inform how we look at the road and what options to consider for it.
Tell me if I'm missing anything. The main advantage of the turning lane is for left turns. Left
turns and to a lesser degree, separation between the two directions of travel. Right now, you have oncoming traffic that's a few feet away from you. Whereas separating that out has documented benefits as well.
So there are ever any issues where you have somebody going east who wants to make a left turn and someone going west who wants to make a left turn? Any problems of any clashes or any issues that emerge because it's only one lane and that could create a problem? Any feedback on that? Any history on that?
None that I'm aware of. No, I mean the center turn lane. So the one issue that can present itself is if you have streets that are offset slightly. If the street on the north side of 5th Street or 6th Street is offset a little bit in such a way that two cars that are waiting to turn at the same street would have to essentially cross paths, that could be an issue, and that's something that we'll certainly look at as we get further along.
Concerned. I mean, that is a concern because you have That is a concern. One lane, and you could have two cars both making. I'm submitting that concern.
Okay, yeah,
One lane, and somebody wanting to make a left turn going. His car is facing west, and someone else wants to make a left turn. His car is facing east.
mhm. Yeah, no, I thank you
Do
for
they fight it out? How do?
Let me jump in here really quick. Hi, and introduce myself, Israel Becker. My name is Andy Bemis. I work with Ryan in the Department of Transportation.
Hi, Andy. Hi.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for all your really good feedback and inquiry into this project. It's all great stuff we want to hear. Also want to encourage you to, if you have a chance, to submit them via the survey link on the website so we can capture that together. We're taking notes of the meeting, but it'd be really helpful to have your thoughts, and you can take your time with it too.
Okay.
That way, kind of put everything down. But with the left turn issue, generally, if you think of another 3-lane street in Tucson, like a Tucson Boulevard or something like that, typically, like Ryan's saying, where the street both cars are trying to turn onto is not offset. Like most of think of any neighborhood street that's crossing a more major street, the cars turning left can both be in that center left turn lane and make that turning movement at the same time without crossing each other's paths, because you don't need to make that turning movement on top of each other. So that happens regularly. And one advantage actually of that configuration over a 4-lane configuration is when both cars are waiting to make that left turn, you have visibility of oncoming traffic because you're directly in front of the other left turning car. Whereas when you're trying to make the left turn in a 4-lane cross section and there's another car,
Right, you don't see. Okay.
You can't see that oncoming traffic. So that's just one issue. Actually, it facilitates left turns. But I want to be really clear that, and Ryan, and I think some of this was earlier in the presentation, it may have gotten, missed, but there are some other advantages of the 3-lane cross section from a safety perspective, also particularly for people walking across the street who, have less lanes to cross and there's better visibility for them. Some of the fatalities that have occurred on this corridor were pedestrian fatalities. But to be clear into your earlier question,
you're saying that they just have to cross 3 lanes instead of 4 if they're crossing.
Yeah, and I may have come on after this slide in the presentation, so my apologies if that's the case. There's a situation called the multiple threat where, similar like we're describing with left turners, when a pedestrian's crossing the street, frequently a car in the first lane will stop because they see that pedestrian. That car then blocks the view of the second lane in a 4-lane crossing.
Okay.
So that's a very dangerous situation, and that's why the street. And I also want to take a minute to just address some of the questions that have come in the chat while we're having this conversation. And one of them was, if we don't do the 3-lane cross section, like if we don't make that change and we plan on keeping the existing striping, will the street be repaved? Yes, absolutely. So that's the street is going to be repaved either way. That's included in the bond program. And so really what we do when any time a street is repaved, it gives us an opportunity to evaluate the functioning of that street, look at the traffic volumes, look at the safety history, consider current standards, and evaluate whether it makes sense to change that striping. And so that's basically what we're doing now. So the street will have new pavement either way. And to your earlier question, Israel, yes, and Ryan mentioned it, that we understand that it is expected that there would be some increase in travel times along the corridor. And those are the trade-off, but there are some safety benefits associated with that. There's some multimodal benefits like providing bike facilities and safer pedestrian crossings, et cetera. So those are the trade-offs we need to weigh. And at this stage of the design, we have some rough estimates of how much we think that travel time could increase. Ryan mentioned it in the presentation, I think 6% in the morning rush hour, 8% in the evening peak hour for a trip all the way across the 5-mile stretch of this corridor. That said, we're really early in the outreach, talking to neighborhoods, talking to businesses to get a sense of people's interest in the corridor. Do people, do you think, yes, there is a big safety concern? I witness, and I would be really supportive of this change, recognizing that it might increase traffic times or travel times, or absolutely not. I think travel times are more important to consider here. And that's the kind of public sentiment we're trying to get a handle on now, so that when it comes time to make a recommendation for a treatment, we have a sense of both the kind of technical side and the public sentiment. Also, that public sentiment is going to inform how much analysis we'll do into, right now, like I said, we have some big preliminary and now traffic analyses on how it would impact travel times. If we end up after this first round of outreach thinking, there seems to be a lot of support for this potential 3-lane option, we're going to do some additional analysis to ensure we have a good understanding of what that traffic impact would be and make sure that's still acceptable to our kind of technical standards on the roadways. So I hope that brings some clarity to the conversation and to the timeline. Ryan, we do have to spend these funds. Ryan, you're still sharing screen, by the way, or whoever is. We're seeing we're not seeing the presentation anymore, but
I think someone else is sharing their screen. Let me. You're not familiar with Teams, it might be tricky to undo that. So let me.
Okay. But just to finish the thought, I think we do want to keep the project moving and make a determination before too long, because we want to get the street resurfaced in its schedule and everything. But we're early in the outreach right now, and there's certainly time to submit your comments. And then we will be sharing information back out with everyone we've touched base with on the process so far at later stages. So. Thank you for letting me interject. I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Ryan. Just thought lend some additional insight there and handle some of the questions from the chat.
No problem. You have good thunder.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, why don't we see if there's any questions in the chat that haven't been addressed yet. I see Elizabeth asked, can you talk about the benefits for cyclists? Yeah, the primary benefit is really going to be the addition of the bike lane. And as I mentioned, along most of the corridor, we would expect we would have room for a buffered bike lane. So that would be east of about Palo Verde Road. The roadway is wide enough that we would have room for a buffered bike lane. And in total, the width would probably be about 8 or 9 feet for the bike lane and the buffer. So that's the main advantage, really, is allowing bicyclists to ride along the street and not be in a vehicle lane. Let's see. For residents whose access to their home is 5th Street, what can we expect? I'm assuming, based on the following quote, you said this project would take roughly 4 months. This seems quite optimistic considering our experience with other projects around town. I mean, that's a good question. So, the type of project that this is, as I mentioned, this is kind of 2 projects in one. The repaving project, that's going to be the one that's going to have the most impact on travel and most impact on your life, really, especially if you live along 5th Street. And this is what's called a total reconstruct. So we remove the asphalt and the sublayers down to the dirt, essentially, and reconstruct that. Excuse me. Apologize. And based on other projects that we've had going on of that type, 2 to 3 months is what we're expecting for that work. This is not the same as a project like Broadway or Grant Road, where each phase of construction can last a year or more. So that is sort of the expectation there. And then there's also the pedestrian safety and walkability piece, which is a lot of work outside the roadway, and that's between Campbell and Alvernon. That we would expect would take about 4 months. It is possible that those would not be able to be done concurrently, that those would be done consecutively. This is all something that kind of gets figured out when we're at the point where we're actually working with the construction company on the construction schedule. So I don't have a great answer for that right now, but east of Alvernon, the disruption would be most likely no more than 2 or 3 months. I see Lynn said, I see some traffic being diverted to Speedway and Broadway as a positive. 5th, 6th Street is mostly small businesses, residential, and schools. Yeah, thank you for your comment, Lynn. As I mentioned, we don't expect to see a great amount of diversion, but something sort of just anecdotally, if you look at the case studies, if you read about these kinds of changes that have been done in other places, people talk about the change in the nature of the road is that it becomes less of a thoroughfare and more of like a street that people live and shop and go to school on. So that's a much sort of more subjective, fuzzier thing, but that is something that other people have reported in other places where this has been done. See, Jay Canavo has his or her hand up. Feel free to unmute yourself and.
Hi there. I had a question just because not all bus stops have those turnout lanes. If in fact there's just one lane going in each direction, won't it kind of back up just like the thing we're trying to, mitigate, where cars are being backed up waiting for buses to get loaded and move along?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So along most of the corridor, the roadway is wide enough, and the bike lane will be wide enough that when a bus pulls over to the curb to pick up or drop off passengers, that'll essentially take the bus out of the vehicle lane. So it would kind of have the same effect as a bus pullout. So we would expect that cars would be able to go around them, and it wouldn't create that issue essentially. See, there's a question from Carla. My two questions: will areas that are still flooding severely, such as East 6 by the church school? Maybe there's another part of that question coming in, but I'll try to speak to that. So the repaving work does not include funding for drainage improvements. There are locations where there has been discussion of potentially doing a project. One of them is at Sewell Elementary. That's about halfway between Craycroft and Wilmot along 5th Street. There's a pretty significant wash that runs north-south through that area. There is some flooding that happens during heavy rain events. And there's actually a project being considered that would put in large basins, essentially in the footprint of the school as it is now in the playground area, that would capture a lot of that water that's currently just flowing straight into 5th Street. So that's an improvement that we'd expect to see if that moves forward. And that's a separate project, so I'm afraid I can't speak to sort of what the process is there and how far along that is. Let's see. Yeah, nearing Wilmot. So I think we were talking about the same place. So second question, there's a lot of pleasure walking between Campbell through and Columbus. Will pedestrian crossing walking be addressed well? So, as I mentioned, there's the pedestrian safety and walkability project that is planned between Campbell and Alvernon. So that would include new and ADA compliant sidewalks to fill in the gaps or replace any sidewalks that aren't currently traversable by people on mobility devices. New landscaping, lighting, other improvements of that nature, but also improved street crossings. So that could take the form of something like a hawk light, the push button crossings that you see that have the flashing lights that the cars stop for. That's one option. There's other kinds of beacons that are used that are push button activated that might also be something we could consider. But also, refuge islands like the one that I mentioned along 36th Street that was installed after that road was converted from 4 to 3 lanes. Those, even without a signal, those can make it a lot easier to cross because essentially you just have to wait for one lane of cars. Then you can go and wait in the middle, wait for the other lane of cars, and then cross. So between Campbell and Alvernon, these are all things that are on the table. When we get started on design, things that we will look at. Don't see any other questions in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute and if you have any other questions, please feel free to do so. I see Andy. If you look in the chat, Andy Bemis has posted a link to the project website. I'll share my screen again just to get that up. Computer is very slow. Okay. So yeah, so there's project website you can reach that way. There's also my contact information if you want to email or give me a call to discuss the project. Always happy to do that. So yeah, so if anybody has any other questions, happy to answer those now. Any other comments, any other thoughts you have, happy to address those if anybody's got anything else. Oh, and I'll throw in a shout out here. If you haven't already followed the sign-in link that Amanda shared, maybe we can reshare that just so that it's at the bottom. You have to scroll up for it. We would love it if you could sign in just so we can, we like to keep a record of how many people are coming to the meetings. If you provide your information, we can, add you to a mailing list. And you can get updates on the project as the project moves forward. All right, and going once, going twice. All right, if there's no other questions, I think we might wrap it up. I want to thank you all for joining. Appreciated the opportunity to talk to you and answer your questions. And please look forward to moving this project along and hopefully hearing from you again. We'll be sending out mailers, as I mentioned, as we kind of get further along and broaden the conversation. So stay tuned, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.